strikes me, that the sentencing seems to have softened up a bit. Every single sentence now that you see, there is at least some part of it suspended. And I'm just wondering, what is this all about, So many people now who have broken the law, and broken the law very, very seriously, they're making the argument, they had a traumatic childhood, or that they are drug addicts. I mean, they made themselves drug addicts.
Would you not have sympathy for them in that circumstance? Because that's the point that's always made in
I have
court.
sympathy for every single person, and I never sentenced, in 21 years, I never sentenced any person that I didn't have sympathy for and that I wished I didn't have to do it. But, we're paid to do a certain job, and that's the job we should be doing.
What form of sentencing would you be in favour of, Judge? I mean, you had 21 years' experience on the bench. Away from the suspension, I mean, suspension is at the discretion of the judge in the case. Mandatory would take a lot of that away. Where would you impose mandatory sentences?
I don't think that is a matter for judges to decide, and that may be the very, very problem, you see. There are a small number of mandatory sentences. That's the decision that's made by the legislature, and the legislature are supposed to represent the public at large. And if that's what the public want, and that's what goes into the law, that's what the judges should be imposing. But there seems to be a resistance in certain levels of the courts to being told what to do to mandatory sentencing.
I think of in particular that there is a drugs legislation. There's a 10-year mandatory sentence. I think it's if you're caught in possession of more than €13,000 or so of drugs, the mandatory sentence is 10 years. But I know from my experience in courtrooms that 10-year mandatory sentence is very rarely handed down because of the reasons you were talking about, the various different reasons for suspension. Do you think that needs to be changed at this point?
One of the statements that the Law Reform Commission made in the consultation paper was that the 10-year sentence doesn't seem to be working. And one of the questions that I asked was, how do they know? Because just like you say, from reading the papers, it appears to me that the 10-year sentence is very rarely imposed. Now, there is, of course, provision in the law. That's a law that came in 1999. And there is a provision in it that judges in exceptional cases can give less than the 10 years. But what appears to me is the exception has become the norm. And that's what I'm questioning.
A lot of the people who would end up before the courts on this would be the drugs mules, the people who would bring the drugs into the country at the request of someone else, people who in their own right would be, you could argue that they were on their uppers and that they were being taken advantage of. Would it not be fair that they receive the dispensation that's at the court's discretion?
That's the argument that the Law Reform Commission make, that it doesn't seem to be working because the only people who are coming before the courts and who would be open to the 10-year sentence are what they call the low-level offenders. But that may be true. But whether you're a courier or whether you're a drug baron, to bring €750,000 worth of cocaine into this country is going to do as much harm whoever brings it in. And the person who is supposed to be the courier is as responsible for the teenager who goes out tonight and overdoses. Do you understand me? And the sentence was brought in the 1999 as a minimum sentence. So therefore, if the 10 years was, except in exceptional cases, imposed, there'd be a lot less couriers recruited by the drug barons. And I hate calling them, barons, because it kind of gives them an almost a respectability that they don't deserve. Mm. And then you could start looking at the maximum sentence then for the people who are actually gaining in a big way what we'll call the barns, for the sake of any other word. You could use the maximum sentence then, scaling it down depending on the facts of the case.
So would you argue then, Judge Patwell, that effectively that 10-year mandatory sentence, it was brought about for a reason, that if you're caught with above €13,000, regardless of circumstances, the court should pass down that sentence to you?
Except in very exceptional cases.
Such as?
I mean, you had a case there in the recent past where a woman, she was a courier, but she had about €750,000 worth of cocaine, and she had the whole of her sentence suspended because she had young children. You know, the responsibility for the young children starts with her. She knew that when she undertook to bring in €750,000 worth of poison into our country.
Do you think that a lot of judges take into consideration the issue of space in the prisons? Because judges, they might sit on the bench, but they don't go into the courtroom blind. They know the pressures that the prison system are under. Do you think that that is a factor, either consciously or subconsciously, when they are also making decisions about suspensions?
I would have been surprised to think so until I read the consultation paper. And actually, deep down low, coming towards the end of the consultation paper, that very fact is actually mentioned. Now, it would surprise me because it's not a judge's job to worry about the space in the prison. That's the job of the executive. A judge has a job to do up to the point where he sentences. What they do with the sentence after is not his concern. Or hers, should I say. There are a lot of excellent female judges too. That's, for the executive to do their part of the job.
And if that came through from this consultation paper, obviously this is a discussion document, but if that came into judges' thinking, would that make the job of a judge very difficult when they're talking about, difficult and challenging sentences?
It would make it impossible if before passing a sentence I had to turn over to one side or the other and say to a guy sitting down in the court, a representative of the prison, what kind of room have you in the prison this morning? Sure, that's crazy.
One final thing before I finish up. I mean, there's the suggestion that there'll be a lot of people appearing before the courts in the months ahead if they don't pay their household charge, because the limit to pay, the deadline for paying, is coming up very, very soon. How would you have dealt with that if you were still on the bench, with all those people coming before you with the household charge, if they hadn't paid it, as so many seem determined not to do?
I'm very much against the household charge. I think it's an unjust tax. But before the end of March, I'll be paying it myself because it is the law.